Hey, welcome back. Today we're making baklava, but there's wheat in it. This is a super simple recipe, and I will be dosing mine at about 50 milligrams per triangle piece, but you can dose yours however you'd like, and I'll leave instructions in the description on how to do that. And baklava has a pretty light flavor, so I am using wax for this recipe, but you can use bud if you would like to, and I'll also leave instructions in the description on how to do that. And now let's get started. I am using 1 gram of wax, and mine came in a glass container, but if yours did not come in an oven-safe container, please remove it before you start decarbing. Since mine is oven-safe, I'm going to place it straight onto my baking sheet with a silicone mat or some parchment paper underneath, and then I'll put that in the oven at 240 degrees Fahrenheit for about 35 minutes. While that's in the oven, we'll start preparing our honey glaze for the top. I'm grabbing 1 cup of sugar, half of a cup of honey, 3/4 of a cup of water, and 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. Then we'll put all of that into a saucepan and mix it together. Then we'll put this on the stove at a medium-high heat until it comes to a low boil, and make sure you stir it while it's heating up so it doesn't boil over. Then we'll reduce the heat and let it simmer for about 5 more minutes. And then we'll just remove it from the heat and leave it to the side to cool. By now our wax should be finished decarbing, and mine's still in the glass container, so I'm just dumping it out onto my silicone mat or parchment paper, and then I'll stick it in the freezer for about 20 minutes to stiffen up. Next, we'll grab our baklava pastry ingredients. So I have a 9x13 baking dish, 4 cups of walnuts, 1 package of phyllo dough, which you can find in the frozen section of your grocery store next to like puff pastry, and make sure you thaw it per the package instructions, and cinnamon. And we'll also be using the can of butter after we infuse it. But first we're going to get our nuts ready. So I am putting them in a food processor. Mine is small, so I'm doing it in 2 batches, but you could do it all together if you're able to. It's going to be a total of 4 cups of walnuts and 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And we will pulse that a couple of times until it is coarsely ground, and then I just put it in a bowl to the side so it's easy to access when we need to layer it into the baklava. Now all of our ingredients are ready, so we just need to quickly infuse our butter and then we can assemble our baklava. So I'm grabbing my wax out of the freezer, and now it's stiff enough that I can just peel it off of my silicone mat and stick it to itself and then stick it to a fork. Then set that to the side while we melt down our butter. I'm melting down half a cup of butter in a double boiler, which is just a saucepan with a glass bowl or measuring cup on top. When that is melted down, we will grab our fork with the wax on it and stir it into our butter until all of the wax is off of your fork. And I'm typically stirring it for about 3 to 5 minutes to make sure everything is really evenly distributed throughout my butter. And now we are finally ready to start assembling our baklava. So just take that off the heat, and then we will grab our phyllo dough, which again should be thawed per the package instructions. This dough gets brittle as it dries, so I'm only going to work with 1 of these packages at a time, and I'm not going to open the other one and expose it to the air until I'm ready for it. It came in sheets that are 9 by 14 inches, and my baking dish is 9 by 13 inches, so I'm first just going to cut about 1 inch off the end so that it'll fit comfortably in my baking dish. Again, this dough dries out and gets brittle, so we do want to keep it moist while we are layering it into our baking dish, which does take a little minute. So to help keep the dough moist, I am lining it with wet paper towels on both sides of my stack of dough. And finally, we will start assembling our baklava. I have my melted can of butter and a pastry brush, and we're basically just going to be layering can of butter and the phyllo dough. So I'm starting with the can of butter and getting a good layer of that on my baking dish, and then we will grab a piece of that dough and layer that right on top of the can of butter. With every piece of dough we put down, we are going to brush it with can of butter before putting the next piece down. And this is how you get those crispy layers of dough in your baklava. So each of these sheets, we will gently lay on top of the last one, layer some can of butter, put another sheet down. And you are going to do this 10 times for your first set of layers. Then we will add our first nut layer. I am using 1 1/3 cups of walnuts, and I'll just shake it around or kind of brush it with my hand so I get it evenly distributed over that dough. Next, I'm going to flip my stack of dough over. And the reason I do this is because the bottom layer is soaking up the water from my paper towel, and as it soaks up too much water, they do tend to get a little soggy and break. So it kind of sucks because if you let it dry, they get brittle and they break, but if you get it too wet, they get soggy and they break. So I just like to rotate it to make sure I'm using all the dough and I'm not going to waste some of the layers because we do want all of them. And even if it breaks, you can see mine kind of broke into 2 pieces. You can just layer it as best you can and all the other layers will kind of make up for it. So don't worry if there's, a little bit of uncovered nuts or something like that. You can still use that soggy layer and we will just brush some more can of butter on top and keep going. And when we add our next layer of phyllo dough, you won't even know that there was a broken layer unless you break this layer too, be careful. And then we will just put can of butter on top of that as well. So again, we're doing our layering method of putting the dough down, putting some can of butter, putting some dough, putting some can of butter until we have 8 layers total in this section. Then we will add 1 more layer of nuts, so 1 1/3 cup of walnuts, and then we'll keep going with our phyllo dough. And you can see I'm getting to the bottom of my ingredients that I have right now. I am going to need to cut my other bit of phyllo dough, and I'm running a little low on butter. So I'm going to melt down half a stick of butter and add it in. Then I'm going to cut my phyllo dough to size and replenish my stack over in the corner. And again, make sure we're wrapping it with paper towels so that it won't get brittle. I'm mixing my butter together to help the infused butter kind of disperse throughout my new butter, and then we will keep layering 8 more layers of dough and 1 more layer of nuts. And now, I bet you guessed it, we will continue layering our phyllo dough for 10 more layers until you have used all of the dough in your package and all of your can of butter. And even if you have a little extra can of butter left at the end, just dump it on top and try to spread it as evenly as you can on that top layer of dough because it is infused, so we don't want to waste any of it. And finally, we will cut it into pieces before we bake it because it'll get really crispy and flaky in the oven and you won't be able to cut it cleanly afterwards. So I'm cutting it into thirds and then into thirds again. So I have 9 rectangles. And then I will cut each of those diagonally into 18 triangles of baklava. And I am holding the corners down just so the knife doesn't peel up my layers. And once that is cut, we will put it in the oven at 325 degrees for 1 hour and 15 minutes until it is nice and golden brown like this. And the final step is to drizzle our honey glaze over the top of each piece of baklava. And you want to try to get even coverage and drizzle it all across the top and in the cracks so it'll drip down and soak into all the layers of our baklava. And that is it. Here is our finished baklava. Technically, you should cover it and leave it overnight and let it soak up the honey glaze, but you're going to do what you're going to do. Now I am obviously digging in right away because it smelled so dank, how can I not? But you should be patient. It really does taste better the next day once it's soaked it all up. But I was excited to cut into it and see those layers. You can see we've got them really evenly distributed with the walnuts and the phyllo dough layers. And now it's got that touch of sweetness from our honey glaze. I am so excited to hear how you guys like this one. Now mine are about 50 milligrams per triangle, but remember to check the description for dosing information and start small, just eat half if you need to. It can take 2 to 3 hours for edibles to fully set in, so keep that in mind before going back for seconds. Let me know what you thought of this recipe and video in the comments, and if you try making this at home, I would love to see pictures. You can find me on Instagram, and as always, thank y'all so much for watching.